Just before we begin, I want to remind everyone to please silence your cell phones and take note of our emergency exits at the front and rear of the auditorium. My name is Jenna Blair. I'm the Campus Engagement Manager here at the Hood Museum of Art. And thank you for being with us for today's talk, a space for dialogue, fresh perspectives on the permanent collection from Dartmouth students, in conjunction with the exhibition, Elegantly Violent, Exploring Masculinity and Gender Expectations in Women's Sports, curated by Josie Harrison, the museum's Mellon Special Project Intern. Josie is a senior studying film and media studies and geography, and a student athlete on the Dartmouth women's rugby team. Before I give her the podium, I want to take a moment to thank Josie for her passion and vision in creating this exhibition, and for her myriad contributions to campus engagement and the student experience here at the Hood. It is my pleasure to introduce the wonderful Josie Harrison to begin our program today.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you for coming to my presentation. It really means a lot to me that you would take time out of your day to come and hear me talk about an installation and a topic that is so important to me. So without further ado, I invite you into the world of my space for dialogue, Elegantly Violent, Exploring Masculinity and Gender Expectations within women's sports. To start, I ask you to read the above quote, a sentence with four words which have both driven and haunted my career as a female athlete and rugby player. 4 words that carry significant weight for most female athletes. Please sit and think about what this phrase might mean to you, what images it conjures. While this exhibition is inspired by my personal experiences and the amazing athletes I have met over my years, it is also inspired by the desire to break down this statement. A statement that is too often used as a throwaway comment or insult, invalidating the work and actions of not just female athletes, but all women and girls. A comment that is only a part of the problem and a small piece of the barriers that women and girls face when trying to get in or stay in sport. For some context, in 2020, the Women's Sports Foundation released a report highlighting gender disparities in sports participation within the USA for those aged 7 to 17. The report showed that girls are more likely to have never played a sport and were even less likely to be actively participating in sport. And while this is telling of sports participation, there are other factors that impact the experience of girls in sport beyond just whether they have or have not played. 68% of girls currently playing report having a male coaching staff, a stat that may seem irrelevant to some, but most athletes, and I'm sure most people in this room, can speak to the importance of representation within their role models. And speaking of representation, for young female athletes, only 13% of parents encourage their girls to follow sports and sports figures, with the percentage getting drastically lower for female sports and sports figures. These statistics showcase only a small amount of the various barriers, hurdles, and challenges a young female athlete must navigate to even begin playing. And what is more alarming is that these statistics grow more dire for women of colour and from low-income backgrounds, showcasing the importance of considering intersectionality when talking about the female athlete experience. So, elegantly violent is a topic. Sport is seen as a space made for and by men. A space for championing masculine traits such as strength, muscularity, and aggression. A notion evidenced by men being encouraged or rather expected to play, while women must justify their desire to participate in any activity based upon these traits. And a major part of this problem is that there is an ongoing blurring of gender identity and presentation, especially within sport. This idealized binary that to be masculine is to be male and to be strong, muscular, and powerful makes you masculine continues to fuel the deficit of girls in sport and of respect female athletes receive. Furthermore, the policing of this binary has led to too many female athletes, disproportionately female athletes of colour, facing gender-based scrutiny, suggesting that when a female athlete dominates, when she reaches the peak of her career, has won countless championships, and has built her body for that purpose, that she couldn't possibly still be female. Because to follow with the popular binary I previously highlighted, the alternative is to be female, and to be female is to be feminine, submissive, emotional, and quiet. Elegantly violent serves as a counter-argument to these ideas and understandings of gender and female athletes. To be masculine does not mean to be male, and to be strong and muscular does not mean you have to be masculine. Throughout Elegantly Violent, women and female athletes confidently embrace all aspects of sport, actively defy the binary, challenge stereotypes, and embody confidence in a way that women are too often told they shouldn't. And as the idea for Elegantly Violent evolved, and as I began to research and curate the objects for the show, 4 clear sections, or rather frameworks, of the Elegantly Violent story came to light. The 4 frameworks became history, objects from over 100 years ago that showcase early examples of women in sport, embracing masculinity and or defying the social norms and gender expectations placed on them. Compete. These objects showcase examples of female athletes competing at some of the highest levels of competition, highlighting discourse around uniform, appearance, muscularity, and their actions. This section is also arguably the main part of Elegantly Violent, as it is home to representation of day-to-day athletes showcasing strength and reclaiming typically male-dominated spaces. The next section is impactful identities. And while the focus of the exhibition is on female athletes and gender discourse, this section acknowledges intersectionality, other aspects of a person's identity that impact their female athlete identity. And the identities covered in this section include sexuality, race, and nationhood. And then the final section is the spectator. This section questions you as a spectator, It highlights how these stereotypes and binaries are created or reinforced in our culture, and thus how it is the role of us as the spectator to question our understandings, where they come from, and why they are there. So, first section, history. As I previously mentioned, the first section or framework, history, highlights earlier historical examples of female athletes and women competing in sporting activities commonly reserved for men. Containing 4 objects, the first 3 objects are photos showcasing more domestic sporting acts, highlighting differences in presentation while completing the same or similar action. That being said, the object I want to draw your focus to is the one to the right, golf for women. This piece wasn't originally going to be in this exhibition because of its face value, seemingly showcasing it as a very stereotypical portrayal of women. The composition of the object plays into the way wrestling audiences read from left to right, and as we are drawn to the top left corner to view her face, before following her outstretched arm as she carries what looks like a handkerchief. Furthermore, the way her clothes and hair are blowing in the wind draws the eyes of the viewer smoothly from left to the right of the object. The image plays on the wind motif even more when incorporating the text, as the image is broken up by the fluid line before the words. As you look more closely, you can see another woman swinging a club in the background, to the left of the woman. So the only woman in action in this object is the woman in the background, creating ideas of leisure and play as opposed to performance and competition, as the emphasis is not on the woman actually playing, but rather the woman looking wistfully into the distance. The reason this object went from being not really considered to becoming one of my favorites is thanks to its context as the cover of the book, Golf for Women by Genevieve Hecker. Hecker's book is thought to be one of the first books written about sport with the primary audience being women. And what she talks about does not include conforming to expectations, but rather defying them. She details the barriers and attitudes from men she has faced, and then provides advice on how to combat them. In her book, the reader sees how she balances conformity of the time with challenging the misogyny thrown her way almost daily. For context, Hecker was by far one of the best female golfers of her time, a 2-time women's US amateur champion in 1901 and 1902. She was considered both formidable within the women's category and competitive within the men's, a notion unheard of at the time. Her accomplishments saw her inducted into the Connecticut Golf Hall of Fame and the Metro Golf Hall of Fame in 2020. So while a fitting part of the history section, Hecker's story creates a fitting transition into the next section or chapter. Compete. Compete embodies the discourse around masculinity and gender stereotypes in women's sports. The objects in this section highlight women competing in a way that can be most simply described as, well, competitive. In these objects, the athletes depicted are among many things: strong, sweaty, muscular, and powerful, all aspects that tie in with traditional ideas of masculinity. The 5 objects in this section highlight different examples and even different levels of athleticism, but one of the ones that encapsulates elegantly violent the most is Delilah Montoya's order resting in her corner. An object drawn from her series, Women Boxers, The New Warriors. Here, the photographer Delilah Montoya has captured not just an image, but a dynamic moment in time, showcasing opposing representations of gender and embodiment of gender expectations. Delilah Montoya completed this project by following a wide variety of women boxers as they competed against others and each other. She sought to showcase female boxers, their strength, tenacity, skill, and aggression, all values which see women in combat sports much more heavily scrutinized regarding their gender. The collection was described as a photography collection featuring strong, courageous women taking on a man's sport by Art Publica Press, the oldest and most accomplished publisher of contemporary and recovered literature by Hispanic creatives and authors. And looking at this particular image, Audrey resting in her corner, the title itself provides a clear description. You see the boxer, Audrey, resting in the corner of the ring, presumably between rounds of a fight. To look deeper, the viewer's eyes are actually drawn to Audrey, thanks to the composition of this image, the use of low angles, and triangulation of points of interest. The positioning of Audrey in between the heels of the ring girl and the ropes of the ring draw the viewer's eye to the boxer, helping make her the center of attention, even though she's not the biggest element of the image. And there are people in Montoya's image I want to highlight. Obviously, the boxer Audrey, who I've already mentioned, but also the woman hanging between the ropes seen through the legs of the ring girl, and then the ring girl herself. Through these three women, we are seeing three completely different representations of women in sport. Audrey, as the athlete competing in a combat sport, is most obviously breaking down stereotypes of gender. However, the woman ringside is also doing this in a much more subtle way. She serves as a representation of the spectator in this image, and is breaking down the ideas of sports spectatorship also being a space reserved for men. These two women seem to provide a juxtaposition to the ring girl, helping to fuel the dynamic story being told in this image. The ring girl, from what we can tell, is partaking in an expected role of a woman in this context, wearing high heels and adhering to the hypersexualized expectations of a ring girl. That being said, I do want to acknowledge assumptions that have been made in the viewing of this piece, most notably that the ring girl is a ring girl. To the average viewer of this piece, there is opportunity for discussion around the identity of the person in heels. Are they representing what we've been taught to expect? Are they breaking down any narratives? Are they a girl? Thanks to my research, I know that she is a woman, but it is something to consider when viewing pieces like this. Another piece from Compete I'd like to highlight is the Eggs Mini Marathon by Todd George. Probably one of the most dynamic and active pieces and elegantly violent, the Eggs Mini Marathon is an image of exactly that. Taken by the acclaimed documentary photographer, Ted George, it provides a snapshot into the world and excitement of some of the earliest examples of female-only competitive races. The composition of this object is incredibly dynamic, busy, and the placement of the central figures liken the scene to the Last Supper, giving it an almost religious feel to it. In the image, you have all of the women rushing to get something to drink before continuing with their race, and with each individual woman telling a different story. So I'd recommend a fun game for you as you view this piece. Look at each woman and imagine what her life looks like. Is she a chef, a banker, a stay-at-home mom, a full-time runner? And then in the middle of this piece, there seems to be an interesting interaction between three women. As one reaches with her outstretched arm to try and grab a cup, she crosses over the body of the woman to her right, who is looking at her in what I interpreted as a bit of a judgmental way. And behind these two women is the tall woman, looking over their heads, staring directly down the barrel of the camera, with what I would call a neutral expression. So that being said, what is the Eggs Mini Marathon? Well, in 1972, Fred LeBeau, the then president of the New York Roadrunners Club, was tasked by a women's shaving cream company to create a quote-unquote women's marathon. So with miniskirts being all the rage, LeBeau founds the Mini Marathon, a 10K race exclusively for women. And after a very prompt switch in sponsors, it becomes the Eggs Mini Marathon. And then for those of you that don't know, Eggs is a brand of ladies' pantyhose. So a marathon series created as a marketing ploy that went on to provide some of the most competitive sporting opportunities for women at the time, growing from a singular annual race to a whole race circuit, with the final being held in New York, eventually being televised. The Eggs Mini Marathons are a very early example of how investing in women's sports has benefited both the athletes and the investors. A topic so relevant today as more and more women's sports are trying to plead their case for investment, with dated excuses such as nobody watches women's sports being proven wrong every day. The NCAA women's basketball and softball finals, and even the Eggs Mini Marathons, showcase that in fact everyone watches women's sports. All of the women in this photo are sweaty and competing for the best time. The clothes they are wearing are different person to person, with some wearing clothes of a more feminine feel and others of a more masculine. However, the image does not carry the feeling that they care about their image or how they appear. They are there to run and to compete, and that's what they will do. Moving into the next section, impactful identities. Something that I was very aware of while creating Elegantly Violent was how it was being created with all of my life context, and that gender and identity are experienced so differently person to person. Within the three objects in this section, race, nationhood, and sexuality are discussed, notably the impacts they may have on the way female athletes are perceived, and even on who may become a female athlete. I've already very lightly touched on it, but the impact of race is seen most by black women and other women of colour, with black women being significantly more likely to receive gender-based accusations and media speculation. Another identity is sexuality. Another key identity intertwined with the female athlete identity, and thus the piece I've decided to focus on, is Catherine Opie's Dyke Deck. Opie's Dyke Deck is a celebration and a source of representation for queer women and queer love of all categories, with the title reclaiming ownership of the homophobic slave used for lesbians. Opie utilises the suits to represent different kinds of queer women. Hearts showcase couples, spades, masks, diamonds for femmes, and clubs for the jocks. For those that maybe aren't familiar with the terms masc and femme, it's very simple. A masc is a queer woman who presents more masculine, and a femme, someone who presents more feminine. For Elegantly Violent, I decided to focus on the suit of clubs, because it features athletes. Each card is home to an athlete competing in a different sport, ranging from fencing and weightlifting to ballet and lacrosse. Because each suit has 14 cards, I had to select the specific ones to go on show, with the ones I chose highlighting the diversity of sport and of athletes. And while there are 9 cards on show, today there are 4 that I'd like to draw particular attention to: the Ace, 9, 4, and King. The 4 of clubs showcases a skateboarder and helps remind us of the presence of street sports. And the 9 is one of the few examples of a female athlete of colour I could find in the Hood's collection. The Ace showcases an athlete completely shirtless, highlighting the fluidity of gender and sexuality on show in this deck of cards, but also within the LGBTQIA+ community. And then the final card is the King. One of the most feminine presenting athletes of the jock category is given the most masculine of the cards. The King, the epitome of power and masculinity. Here it seems that Opie is drawing attention to the diversity of sports participation and presentation. As often, it is sports that are deemed more feminine, that are seen as least competitive, lacking in skill or strength, when actually that could just be the stereotypes associated with femininity, potentially being arbitrarily placed on those sports. And while the sports depicted in each card are important, the emphasis is on the intersection of their identities as queer women in sport that tell the real story. Historically, women's sport, notably sports that are gendered masculine, have been a safe space for queer women, with a large proportion of players identifying as queer to some degree. A reason from this stems from the ties of masculinity in sport. For queer women, they have already embraced masculinity to an extent, and thus it is not a big job to deal with masculinity associated with sport and embrace it. Women's sport as a non-conforming space became a space for the non-conforming. This leads me into the last section, the spectator. I think this is the section I had the most fun with, dealing with more abstract pieces. In this section, it is the viewer, you, that is targeted and asked to reflect. You become a part of the exhibition. The pieces in this section also have a heavy focus on the body and the female body, with all the faces of women covered either by a gorilla mask or antlered animal. And while this section has 2 pieces, one being by the Gorilla Girls, which draws on gender stereotypes and imbalances within society at large, the one I want to focus on is a piece showcasing seemingly camouflaged female bodybuilders. The Competition by Marnie Weber. Weber's piece is by far the most captivating and visually unusual object within Elegantly Violent. From a distance, it looks like a hot, arid landscape with animals scattered around the rock formations. But as you move closer, you see it as the bodies of female bodybuilders. And again, under further examination, you notice that they are wearing the heads of various antlered animals. Once you've come to terms with the left side of the image, the next confusing piece of the puzzle is found in the crowd full of bunnies and rabbits watching the bodybuilders as they pose and showcase their bodies and muscles. Weber's use of colour, with the bodybuilders camouflaging into the deep reds and oranges of the warm, rich earth and stone, requires the viewer to actively look for each athlete. A search that will take you to all corners of the object and see you look for the sculpted bodies within the sculpted scenery. Often the first question I get asked when people see this is, why the animal heads? Well, Weber uses this as a deliberate form of iconography in her work, stating in a previous interview that in order to find the most emotional impact for her characters, even if it's in a collage, she will put a mask on the character because it signifies a dramatic emotional event for her. And competition is emotional. A common phrase used when a game, bout, or even race is close is "who wants it more?" A phrase steeped in emotion. Who isn't just physically strong enough, but rather whose willpower is greater. The choice of animal also speaks to this idea of competition, strength and power, with antlered animals used as Celtic symbols of nobility and strength. This then creates a comparison between the spectators of this object, the bunnies, as those are animals more often associated with femininity. This piece, while fun to explore and digest, speaks very heavily to the role of the spectator or viewer in sport. It is the spectator that applies their biases, who scrutinizes everything they see based on their no-binaries, and then reinforces them. Through covering the faces of these athletes, we are left with only the body with which to pass judgment on. Thus, this piece invites you to reflect on the expectations and stereotypes that you might bring your way to view this piece. Weber confuses you with the montage style of the object, but also in the narrative she creates and asks you to reflect on. As I am nearing the end of my presentation, I want to bring us back to this phrase and ask you to think about it again. What does it mean to throw like a girl? Is it a good thing? A bad thing? Neutral maybe? What more can be done to shine light on female athletes, to allow them equal pay, equal play, and to just have access to a sport in a way that isn't filled with scrutiny of their bodies, personalities, and gender? And this is where I want to highlight the last piece. The swimmer, Ashley Tapping, by Anderson and Lowe. When creating this exhibition, this is the first piece I found, and the first piece that I decided I wanted to use. That is because for me, this piece, while it does showcase a female athlete, is the only piece that seems genderless. Here, in a more candid and raw moment, Anderson and Lowe highlight the toll of performance sport. Here, Ashley is simply an athlete, with ice bags saran wrapped to her body for recovery, a somewhat universal experience of athletes regardless of gender. In this moment, the priority is not presenting a gendered way to fit expectations. Rather, sports recovery and performance take precedence, subverting expectations of the female image. The light composition, moving from dark to light, and the use of the plain background reinforces the idea of solitude and reflectivity, which is a common feeling regardless of sport, team, or individual. Upon talking to the photographers Anderson and Lowe, they detailed how while they were in their residency at the Chula Vista USA Olympic Training Center, they would see Ashley walking around the facility with these ice bags on whenever she wasn't in the pool. They noted how she couldn't have cared less for the way it looked, but rather it was what allowed her to compete at the level she did, for as long as she did. So she wore them, and it worked. Ashley's success saw her be inducted into the Greater New Orleans Sports Hall of Fame in 2022, and also feature in the University of Arizona Hall of Fame. Outside of her 6 NCAA championships, 20 Louisiana high school championships, and 6 high school state records, her accolades include 3 Pan American Games gold medals, 4 Swimming World Cup golds, and 5 silvers, and then at the Swimming World Championships she won a full set, so a gold, a silver, and a bronze, and was a 3-time Olympic champion, with her first championship coming before she even turned 18. This image of Ashley truly showcases elegantly violent and some of what it means to be a female athlete. And then the last aspect of this exhibition I wish to highlight are the parts that sometimes go unnoticed. The name, wall color, and frame choices. The wall color, Bavarian forest green, is paired with the cherry wood of the frames for 2 very distinct reasons. The first to simulate or create a space reminiscent of a masculine study or library, continuing to play on the themes of masculinity and gender discourse. And then the other reason is the most important to me. The green and wood serves as an ode to all female athletes of the Big Green here at Dartmouth who represent the lone pine with strength, dedication, and grace. And then finally, the name. Elegantly Violent is the most personal reference, or rather dedication, of them all. Elegantly Violent is derived from the phrase elegant violence, an alternative name for rugby, and a name that has been used by the Dartmouth Women's Rugby Team, otherwise known as DWR, pretty much ever since its inception in the spring of 1978. It is the women and people of DWR that I dedicate this the most to. They are who inspired this exhibition and who inspire me every day. They are strong, powerful, kind individuals, but most importantly, a place where I found family over 3,000 miles away from home. And last weekend, they brought the program its first ever Sevens national championship. So thank you for listening, and I'll be taking questions if you have. I'm just that good at explaining things.
When did you start on it? How long did this take you to put this together?
I started on this exhibition in the beginning of full term, and I had basically pretty much everything done by the end of full term. So, and there's just been final checks ever since then. So, yeah.
What are some of the other pieces that you consider putting into your exhibition?
It's interesting because these are all of the pieces that I ever considered putting in. Because there's so few pieces I could find that depicted female athletes. Within the Hoods collection, I think I found maybe 15 pieces and used 13. So there was one piece that I wasn't able to use because it's already slated for an exhibition, and it was of this saint, and it was a prince, and it was a saint that's normally depicted in a very maternal way with children pregnant, but in this one she was doing martial arts, I think it was karate, and I was just like, this is a very interesting alternative take on what this saint means, but I unfortunately couldn't use that because it was slated for an exhibition. But yeah, I was quite fortunate to choose most of my first choices. So.
What's your process for finding pieces?
Going and throwing in some very interesting prompts into the search the collection part of the Hood Museum's website. Yeah, finding the deck of cards was interesting. But yeah, no, seriously though, it is just going into, like, as if you're in the library trying to find sources for your research. I was doing that, but with pieces of art on the Hood's website. So.
Are there